John talked about our generation, this generation. And he said, if it was this type of a generation, I would teach this way. But because it's this boomer generation, the most rebellious generation ever, I have to deal with it this way. And so when God started speaking to him and showing him the things that needed to be done, when you go back to, like, John, why aren't you using your authority? And, the whole story of the woman up on the hill and all these different things. And, you take Carol going through what she's going through, and everything that Bob and Penny and the wick wire thing and the thing going on at the Friends Church, in one hand, it was, to quote someone that I know really well, it was a bloody battle. And at the same time, I think that people, in their own brokenness, and that's one of the things that John talked about over and over and over again. It wasn't this big, huge ministry that was going all over the world. It was this little church. I mean, John used to talk about, we service what we sell here. But I want to do everything that's in the book. And for someone like me that didn't know what was in the book, didn't know anything, and started reading the book, a friend of mine gave me the old Tim LaHaye how to study the Bible, I'm reading the book, and I was like, wow, we get to do all this stuff. And I go to, and these guys are doing this stuff. But at the time, they learned it more, and they learned a little bit more, and learned a little bit more. I remember when we were in 81, when we were in York, the first time, they ever cast out demons out of a girl. What was that little girl's name?
Lizzie.
What was her name?
Lizzie.
Lizzie, yeah.
Libby.
Libby. We were walking through the cobblestones, we were waiting to go to church, and there was probably about 10 of us young people, and the gal, what was that? Jill Austin was there, and we were walking with her, and she stops and she looks at us and she goes, excuse me, you guys, can you stay here for a minute? I gotta go talk to this little girl. She's been following us. Of course, we weren't aware of anything. It was a real narrow, beautiful area, the cobblestone streets and everything. And I remember she turned around and she starts walking towards this girl. She goes, well, hello, I'm Jill. And the minute she said hello, that little girl, it was the strangest thing I'd ever seen. She like manifested it, and her whole body contorted, and she scampered over into the corner of this building, and she scampered down in the corner and looked like a rat and started hissing at Jill. And I remember going, what is that? What's happening? But at the same time, knowing that Jill was fully aware of everything that was going on, and we were there just to watch, right? And she walks right up to her and she leans down and she goes, stop it! And she just rebukes a demon, shut up! And then she looks at Libby and she goes, what's your name, honey? And she reaches out her hand and she stands her up, and the girl stutters and she says, my name is Libby. And she says, well, Libby, would you like to go to church with us tonight? And she says, yes, I would love to do that. And so we go to, that was the York Minster? The York, David, who was a?
St. Andrews.
St. Andrews. Yeah, St. Andrews, LaBelfry.
LaBelfry.
The LaBelfry, the little tiny church next to the big York Minster, right? And I remember Blaine's there going, I got to be a part of this, the Holy Spirit's fallen, and they take Libby back into a back room, and, I think they ended up casting like 19 demons out of her or something, But, it's like these guys were cutting their teeth. They're learning about this. In the beginning, they're telling stories. John's telling stories from reading, all the different stories, talking about Catherine Coleman. And then he starts getting his own stories. He doesn't have to tell stories anymore about other people's stories. He starts getting, did I tell you about the girl whose leg grew? It went from, he's telling stories about people slamming their Bible shut and leaving because he's talking about the Holy Spirit and God moving, to now all of a sudden there's stories. He doesn't have to tell stories about other churches and other people doing it. Now it's starting to happen here. And the more he does it, the more he does it. And it's like you can go back to, when he tells a story about the fish, when he talks about Jesus saying, no, you feed them. You always hear that story, and everybody's talking about, Jesus multiplied the fish. When you hear John talk about it, Jesus gives them a fin or a tail. And as they begin to hand it out, it multiplies. And I really think that that is from John's experience. You guys just were talking about earlier. You know, you get up on the stage and your buddy's saying, hey, you got to wait. You got to wait for the Holy Spirit, right? I remember, who was the old prophetic guy from the 30s that Paul Cain knew? Branham, right? And we're at John's house when we were young. I'm living there. We were saving money to buy a house, and someone had given him like a 35 millimeter film of this guy preaching, right? And we're just all sitting there watching it. You can't hear what he's saying, but he's just up there, and he's not saying a word. He's just pacing back and forth. And there's people on the stage, and they're like literally, like, I mean, this goes on forever, and they're like falling asleep. All the power players, whatever church he's there with, but the state, it's full. It's packed to the rafters with people. And I remember John says, he goes, he's waiting on God. He's waiting on God to move. And all of a sudden, probably like a couple hours into it, the guy finally starts to see the Holy Spirit moving. And then he starts getting words of knowledge and starts ministering. And it was interesting to listen to see John's take on it, because he had been there. He had gone through that. He went up on the stage. Have you heard the story from Lonnie Frisbee about the wart story?
Mm-hmm.
It's that same dynamic, right? God's going to have a healing service next week. Y'all come.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody shows up, and he's up there on stage waiting for words of knowledge. And what's the first word that comes to him? God's going to heal people with warts. Heal somebody with warts. Because I don't get any other words, nothing else happens. People start filing away one by one. I'm embarrassed, I'm humiliated, I'm angry. He literally said, he goes, I'm helping the stage, the band guys load up all their equipment. He goes, I'm kicking the amplifiers. I'm angry at God. And finally, this little girl shows up at the end of the stage all by herself holding her shoe. It's like, what do you want? It's like John walking up the hill with the big, heavy prophetic woman. Look, lady, I don't have time for this. But even in the midst of all that, God shows up on the scene, and there that little girl is, and she's crying, and she says, Mister, and Lonnie comes and looks into her shoe, and it's full of warts. But no one got to see it.
Mm-hmm.
No one got to witness it, but he took a risk and went through the humility of it. And I think that when you think about John and what he went through, and you talk about the apostleship and all the different things, you talk about those things. None of those things were his motive at all. His motive was to simply follow Jesus, because he loved Jesus. And